a program that's been running for 10 years, working with startups, particularly in the nonprofit sector, and now we've moved into the for-profit sector. So you'll hear tonight through both of us a range of our work. In terms of what we're hoping to do tonight is we're going to give you a little overview of Root Cause. We're going to share with you a few goals for what we see in the evening. Rebecca's going to really help you look at social entrepreneurship and figure out where you fit and where the field fits. Then we're going to spend some time doing road mapping and helping you look at, I know many of you are trying to build a social enterprise so that you can win the competition. We've heard a little bit about the President's competition. How many of you are planning to apply? Excellent. Hopefully by the end of tonight there'll be more people raising their hand thinking, this feels great, this feels interesting, I'd like to try as well. And then we'll do a little bit of conclusion and some Q&A, and our hope is that we'll spend about half the time presenting our PowerPoint and save about half the session for Q&A so it can be really interactive. So Root Cause is a nonprofit research and consulting firm, and we work in a variety of sectors. The work that I do has been primarily in the nonprofit sector. We also work deeply with philanthropic entities, whether that be formal foundations or individual donors. But we have a whole piece of our work that's about research and creative ways of looking at impact and social change. And so some of the ways Root Cause works is full-scale business plans with nonprofits, but also helping big funders look at how do you really evaluate metrics, and if 10 different nonprofits are sending you 10 different forms about their metrics, how can you really compare them and know who's really working on best practices? And so a lot of what Root Cause is trying to do is set the stage and really do work that can be best practices for the whole sector together. So a little bit about why we exist. Root Cause, as we say, we like to improve the performance and the communication both in the nonprofit sector as well as in the funding sector. And so if you follow the top arrows, we look at organizations that are working on core social issues. We choose what we think are high-performing organizations, and we work with them on improvement of the social issues. And then if you follow the bottom arrow, we're working with funders. And we're working with funders whose goals are to support the progress of social change. Now, what I know, and probably many of you know who've been in the funding sector, is most funders are doing it from their own lens. And so you might have 5 different funders who are funding a core social issue, but they're all sitting in different offices, and they're all interpreting that with their own idea of what best practices are. And so some of what Root Cause is trying to do is to bring the transparency out front, make everything that we can public between funders, with funders, between each other, and then also create a loop that shows that funders can learn as well. And so if you have nonprofits at the top trying to learn best practices and funders on another loop trying to learn best practices, and that they feed into each other, this is where we can click. That's where working within one organization, I think, is somewhat of an innovation, that we're working on both sides of the equation, that we're not just working with nonprofits or just working with funders, and trying to show the depth of the way we work together. And a little bit about the Social Innovation Forum. We're 10 years old. We're a piece of Root Cause. What we do is we call ourselves a venture philanthropy model. We're an accelerator. And each year we choose a handful of organizations and we give them consulting and coaching and introductions to donors. And then we showcase them. And the way we define it is we work with them very, very closely. We give them support, we give them development people, we give them lawyers, we give them graphic design people, and then by the time we showcase them, we say they're ready to go into any senior level person in the city of Boston and tell their message. And so you might get a group that is kind of a non-profit group that's working very closely with teenagers who's never done a presentation to anybody other than their board members. And when they do to their board members, they're on 6 different pieces of paper. And while they might have one PowerPoint slide, at the end of the 6 months of working with us, they're going to have a PowerPoint deck that's going to be very organized, very together. They're going to know their pitch. They're going to know their key points. They're going to know their financials. They're going to know the key pieces of what they want in growth and development. And the piece that Rebecca has come in to lead this year is we've begun a second accelerator working with our for-profit and our nonprofit groups that have earned income. And we're calling that our impact investing work. And much like the work we do with our nonprofits, we're giving them consulting and coaching and introductions to donors, but it's different donors and different consulting and different coaching based on the way we're building out the two models. And you'll hear a little bit of the way we work with both groups tonight.
Great. So our goal for this session is to give you the tools and resources so you can start to think about your own endeavors and your own enterprises. So we're going to outline some key questions for you to think about as you are on your journey to figure out your venture. And we're going to help provide you with some resources and give you some tools about finding other resources. So when you think about social entrepreneurship, does anyone have a good definition? This is open to all. Go ahead.
Social entrepreneurship is at the intersection of money and meaning. So thinking about how to achieve a blended set of objectives that include financial return and social return on investment.
Okay, so money and meaning together. I'm just going to repeat so it goes on the camera.
Excellent.
What else? Yeah.
Social entrepreneurship can be referred to the application of business principles to social change.
Okay, so application of business principles to social change. This side of the room is a little quiet. Any thoughts over here? Any more thoughts over here? So it's a little tricky because there's actually not a great definition for social entrepreneurship. We can define who a social entrepreneur is. We can define innovation. We can define many of the words that you see up here. But this word, social entrepreneurship envelops a lot of different things. It can be a nonprofit. It can be a for-profit. It can have earned income. It can not have earned income. It spans this wide, wide landscape. So as you start to think about your ventures, you're going to want to think about paring it down so that yes, you're all engaged in social entrepreneurship now, but you're going to want to figure out where it is that you operate, not just in this giant umbrella. So when we're thinking first about your venture and what you want to do, you need to identify a problem and then think about a solution that's going to address that problem. We're going to talk about a few different organizations and kind of what they needed to look at to identify their problem and then identify a solution. So Zoomix, does anyone know about Zoomix?
Oh, over here.
Great. So Zoomix is an organization in East Boston, and it was started by a woman who every day when she was coming home from work, she would see young people on the street. They didn't have a lot of opportunities or after-school programs to go to, and she realized very quickly that in her neighborhood of East Boston, there were no arts organizations. And so she thought about what she could do to start to address this concern, that the kids were just there was not a great place for them to be. And so she created a Zoomix. Now, before she started Zoomix, she really needed to think about, is this a problem for just her on her street, or was this a larger issue? Did it encompass more than just her small, street from the T back to her house? And it did. It affected lots of people in East Boston, a lot of young people in East Boston. And she did some more research, and she found out, are there any other arts organizations, maybe ones that I just don't know about? And she realized that no, there weren't any other arts organizations in East Boston, and that she really needed to come up with this solution. So that's one thing to think about as you're thinking about your ventures, is that you don't want to just create something that's going to address the problem for a small population and not be able to scale to a larger group. The next one I'm going to just briefly touch on is City Feed and Supply. Does anyone know about City Feed and Supply?
Yeah. She's very busy
Again,
over here.
okay.
Yeah.
Great. So City Feed and Supply is a grocery market in Jamaica Plain. And it was started by an individual there who noticed that there were tons of convenience stores selling cigarettes and candy, but no one was bringing fresh produce into the neighborhood. And he thought that this was a real problem. And so he investigated to see, where's the closest supermarket? Is this just a problem that's affecting just me, or is it a larger problem? And he realized that this was really, it encompasses all of JP, and a JP is a pretty wide area, if you know. And so he created CityFeed. And CityFeed is now in 2 locations. They're growing to a 3rd, and they're bringing fresh local produce into the community of Jamaica Plain, and really addressing a problem of limited resources, limited produce, and creating a widespread solution, and a solution that then can scale. So the next thing you need to do is think about your market and your stakeholders. So when you're starting to think about your business, we talked a little bit about the market for Zoomix and the market for CityFeed. Green City Growers is a venture. They're doing $1 million in sales right now. They're doing quite well. If you don't know about them, you should Google them. They're great. And Jesse, the founder, was trying to come up with this idea to address the lack of local produce again in the community. So same issue area. And did a lot of searching around and decided that she wanted to be able to bring local produce in and have people actually bring it in by having people actually have gardens in their homes and in their business places. So what she did is she set out to understand the market, the vegetable growing market. And she found that there were landscape businesses that that also would tend to your vegetable garden, and there were educational groups that maybe would come in and grow a few vegetables in your school or at your business, but there was no large-scale landscaper or large-scale business that was actually coming in and installing a garden in your home or in your business. So she found that she started to dig a little bit more and estimated that her market was about $280 million. In the Boston area. And the way she looked at this market, and this is something that you all will do when you're starting to size your market out, is you need to first segment your market. So she segmented based on residential and commercial, and then went down each of those chains. So in residential, she looked to see how she would further segment that, and she did it based on income. This is a for-profit model. It generates revenue. She needed to make sure that her residential customers could actually pay for this garden installation, vegetable garden installation. So it was, she looked at households that make over $100,000 a year. So that became her target market for the residential area. Then she looked at commercial, and she started segmenting based on service areas. So hospitals, elder care, supermarkets. So she was able to identify what the market would be in those areas as well. And then she decided to take a 10% viability. So she looked across that residential and commercial and decided that she could probably access 10% of that market. And that market, the number that she eventually got to, was about $280 million. That's a pretty attractive market for an investor. So as you're thinking down the line how to make your business or your social enterprise attractive, you want to think about an attractive investment opportunity if you're going the for-profit route. We'll talk about the nonprofit route later.
So the next thing that we talked about that's important as you build a social venture is what does it mean to build a strong leadership team? And so any kind of venture that you build, likely if it's going to be successful, it's going to quickly go beyond you. So you might be the one with the idea, you might be the one doing the research and the strategy, and you might say, I've got an idea. And even the way you have it over in the iLab, that you can kind of put your idea up and people can kind of come and talk to you. If you're going to get something that's going to fly, you've got to look at who do you want to have around you. And so one of the examples that we decided to put up is a group called Blue Homes, who accepted a Business Innovator Award from us this past May. And Blue was kind of interesting. We actually hadn't heard of them until they got nominated for this award. But they have an innovation where maybe 7 or 8 years ago, they looked at the housing stock around the world in particular, and they realized that people were still building houses the same way they were building houses in the 1800s, 18 and 1900s, that it was traditional ways of building. And they did this amazing innovation where they actually build flat houses They have architectural designs. You can choose houses, and the house gets built in an entire day. So you would go, you would sign up for your house. It's worth going to their website and see what the houses look like. So they have 6 or 8 different designs. You know exactly what you're going to pay for a house, which I don't know anybody who's ever bought a house who knows exactly what they're going to pay to both buy the house and move into the house. And then the truck delivers each flatbed piece, and the house gets put together kind of like a model, like a kid's model, in one day. And part of what they did is they innovated this about 7 or 8 years ago, watched as their innovation was coming and they were working through the blueprints, the housing market drop off. So what they did is during the time that the housing market was down for 2 or 3 years, they did all their kind of trial and error and testing and market research and what's going on. And then as the housing market around the country began to pick up, they had a leadership team. So while they were innovating, while they were working on their piece, they were looking at how are we going to build a board of directors. They were looking at what does our brand really look like. They were looking at who's going to be on our leadership team, because when we begin to get this out to sale and we know the sales are going to take off, if we're not ready in a sales and marketing team, in a chief financial officer, in a range of different arenas. And so they put together a leadership team. And once they went out there, headquartered in Waltham, and they also have a second major office in California on the other coast. So they're back and forth with their work. But because they had built the team, when the housing market turned around, they were really ready to grow. And their sales and their impact has been huge. And they are both innovative and coming forth as a very strong business model. And then the other piece that we put out that we think is is very critical when you're building a venture. Again, our view is in order to have a successful venture, very quickly you need partners. And what those partners are can vary. So in some places it's leadership team, it's your board, and it's your staff. But in other places it's who really cares about you and wants to help move this forward, and who are you partnered with, so that it's not just you trying to create your brand, but you're partnering with people who help your brand and your initiative move forward. And so Strong Women, Strong Girls, anybody know Strong Women, Strong Girls? Sydney doesn't know Strong Women, Strong Girls. We're going to have to introduce you. So it was started actually at Harvard by an undergrad when she was, I think, a freshman or a sophomore. And she went to the Phillips Brooks house and said, I have this idea. You know, I grew up and there weren't enough models and role models for me of strong women and all different cultures, and what if I start this program? And so she got the okay from the Phillips Brooks house, but rather than just turn it into, I'm going to go into the neighborhood and create something, she had a big vision, and she looked at, you know, in addition to Harvard, where can I find other partners? So she created a model that she used college students to teach elementary school students about famous and strong women from all different cultures all around the world. And so she could have stopped there, but she said, this is pretty interesting, and not only is it great for the 3rd to 5th graders, it's great for the college students. And so she formed chapters. I think there's 4 chapters in Boston. I know that there's a chapter at Northeastern. I think there's a chapter at this chapter here, I probably should know, I'll think of it, it's what happens when you get older, but she has at least 4 chapters in Boston, so she had very strong partners, and then she got seen by other people around the country and was invited to actually begin the model in both Pittsburgh and in Miami. And so the model is working and moving out, but she's got several different layers. The other layer that she added once she saw that college students could be great mentors was, how does she find adult women who are mid-career who want to mentor the college students who are then mentoring the students? And so she has many different layers of partnership. The other partners that I'd say that Lindsay, who is the founder, was great at building out is she knew how to turn a friend of the organization into a partner. And I'm going to give you a small example. There was an event of ours that she pitched at, and a young woman who was in her early 20s went up to Lindsay and said, I want to help. And she worked for a communications agency. And just as a part of her work, she was able to help get Strong Women, Strong Girls positioned for some of the work they were doing in a better or more appropriate way in the media. It got them a lot of stories, and it got Lindsay a national award just because Lindsay knew how to say back to somebody who said, I want to help you, a way to bring them in organizationally. And so if you're going to do this, you always want to be listening for people who want to help you and how you can bring them into your work.
Good point. So those are just a few things that you need to think about in crafting your enterprise. And we're going to talk now about structure, your entity structure. So you've probably thought at this point, maybe a little bit, or maybe you haven't thought at all yet, about whether you'd go for a nonprofit or a for-profit. And there's some major differences between a nonprofit and for-profit. The types of capital you can take, your return on investment. So a nonprofit, you're going to have a social return, and your for-profit, you're definitely going to have a monetary return, either through equity or dividends. You're going to have taxes. You're not going to have taxes for your nonprofit. You're going to pay your effective business rate tax for your for-profit. Your profits for nonprofit, again, get reinvested in. There are no shareholders. You can continue reading the chart. One of the things that you need to think about is kind of at the bottom there in terms of who's making the decisions. And it's something critical as right now, you are going to be making the decisions about your enterprise, and you're going to continue to make your decisions about your enterprise for a while. But when you do have an investor come in on the for-profit side, you're going to need to figure out how much of that equity you might give up, and therefore how much decision making you might no longer have access to. With a nonprofit, you have a board of directors who you bring on, and you can maneuver your board a little bit more. They're still there to provide fiscal oversight, but you do retain a little bit more kind of hold on your organization. So something to think about, and you can retain hold on your for-profit enterprise as well, depending on equity and how you manage that. We can talk a little bit about B Corps too. I didn't put them on this slide, but if you guys have questions in Q&A, we can definitely go over that and some of the advantages and disadvantages to those. As I kind of briefly mentioned before, a lot of it goes back to capital, and I'll just walk you through this slide a little bit. In the beginning, it's going to be you funding your organization or your business. You're going to bootstrap. You're going to self-fund. You might go to some friends and family or those occasional fools, as we like to loop into this, that kind of category right there. And then you're going to look for seed capital. And this is the capital that if you want to build a prototype or you need that little bit of capital to do marketing, whatever it is, you're going to look for that seed capital. And if you're coming from a nonprofit, you're going to look for foundations that like to fund at the $5,000, $10,000, under $50,000 approximately. And then you're going to look for early stage angel investors or other types of seed money, and that, depending on your industry, what you're interested in, or what your enterprise will be, there are different organizations and different angel groups that fund in that area. So Golden Seeds and others. Your next, there's going to be a split depending on kind of which way you're going. So the nonprofits, I think we just lost that screen.
Okay,
that's okay.
That's fine. There we go.
Oh, I just need to go back one.
Okay.
Perfect, great. So your nonprofits, we're going to go along the bottom. After your seed capital, hopefully you'll be ready for venture philanthropy, and that's that mezzanine stage philanthropy. So that's coming in at larger dollar amounts, so $100,000 over several years. And then you'll probably be ready for large philanthropy. So then you're looking at the big foundations that are granting, millions of dollars. So that's kind of your progression there in terms of growth. And then along the top is your for-profits. And so you're going to look for mezzanine funding, debt, venture capital, royalties, lines of credit. And then you'll be ready for later stage, which are your bank loans and your private equity. So that's kind of a little path of your capital. So you have your nonprofits. You have your nonprofits with earned income. So that's that's like the Girl Scouts, right? They're a nonprofit, and then they sell Girl Scout cookies. You have your, for-profit social enterprises. So something like a Tom's Shoes, right? They're working against their mission. They're selling shoes, and they're donating a pair. And then you have your impact businesses. And those sometimes are a little bit harder to find. Those are your Stonyfields, your Timberlands, those bigger businesses, your Blue Homes that, they don't come out right and they say, hey, we're a social enterprise, but they are doing socially impactful work right along there. And they're usually larger companies. And then you have your traditional for-profit businesses, which you all know about. So bootstrapping, right, goes right across. Debt, any of these entities can take on debt. Philanthropy, it's only for the nonprofits, and venture philanthropy we talked about. Sales, a very important part of your capital continuum. And if you're a nonprofit without any kind of social enterprise, obviously you wouldn't have sales, but everyone else can take, has sales. Program-related investments, and those are generally coming from foundations, and they're part of the foundation's investment strategy that can be put into for-profit businesses, and they can also use that program-related investment to then do a debt vehicle as well. ESG investments, those are like your Portfolio 21 or your Parnassus work groups. They're larger equity groups that are making those types of investments, and they're doing it through a lens of environmental, sustainability, and governmental. They're looking at those pieces to make sure the companies kind of adhere to those practices. And then finally, you have traditional investments, which you all know about: traditional private equity, traditional equity investments, et cetera. I'm going to turn over to Susan for impact.
Sure. So in terms of the kind of venture that you're going to start up, I imagine that it probably is about impact, that your goal, if you're going to do it for this kind of startup, is you're looking for more than just your money. And so what we would say is there's a range of things that you might want to think about. So first of all is beyond financials. What's the goal of your venture? So it might be that you want to earn a profit and you want to earn a living and you want to make that happen, but also what kind of impact are you trying to achieve? Do you want program impact? Do you want to change the field? Do you want to have an advocacy part of it? You want to look at really what you're trying to achieve. The other piece that we would say is quality of the program model. And so you might have 10 different organizations that are working on youth programs, and they're working after school, and they're working with the same population. And so if your innovation is different, what's the difference in your program model? Are you going deeper? And so some of what we know is that there's a number of funders who always say, okay, tell me the cost per student. Well, your cost per student is X for, $1,000 for one program, and it's $10,000 for another program. If your investor isn't going to listen to what the differentiation is, you've lost them if you've got a $10,000 program. If you can show them up front, this $10,000 program keeps a kid out of jail for life, you're probably going to attract a number of people who realize that when a student goes to jail, the life cost of it is many millions of dollars. If you can show that and show the impact of this program works, it's a big cost to society, but the cost to society on the other end is much larger. And so when you define the cost per student, which often people want really quickly, you need to also be able to say the depth of your program and talk about the metrics of how it works and why it works. And so what we often talk about is, we put up their special sauce, but the groups who work with us, we actually have them create a visual program model. And if you want to come up here at the end and look in our program booklet, we actually have some of them printed out. They're very visual, they're very graphic, but it's a way that you can talk a funder through actually the depth of what you do. It's not just we take care of kids after school and we keep them off the streets. We take care of kids, we invest in them in mentors, they spend 30 hours a week with us. Here's why they've changed their behaviors. And the last thing that we say is it's really important to benchmark. So it's not only important to know your model and talk about beyond financials, but you've got to show how you've got those kids and you track them. And not only that you track them for the 6 months you're in their program, if you're saying that you're keeping them out of jail for life, how do you know a year out what they're doing, 2 years out what they're doing? And if you can't do the longitudinal work, then you probably can't show the benchmarking. There are some programs it's really hard to track the students, but there's other programs that you can at least track for a period of time. And so I think you have to be able to know what you can track, Figure out if you're tracking the right metrics, and then move ahead and do it. And then the other piece is, one of the things that Root Cause has done is we actually have published a booklet that's free online. It's available. So if you're going to start a venture and you're wondering what to track and how to track, you don't have to hire an outside evaluator for $10,000. You can figure out what your metrics are. You can read this book. And as I say, it's available online for free. You can buy it at Amazon for, you know, not very much money, but download it for free, so that you can feel like you can understand what you want to track and why the tracking is important.
I just wanted to add one more resource to this
Sure.
as well. The GIN, which I don't know if you guys know about GIN. Okay, yeah. So they just published a new set of standards. They have a set of standards, but they just published a new one, 3.0, and it's the IRIS metric, and it stands for Impact Reporting and Investment Standards. And so especially if you're starting a for-profit social enterprise, you want to check those out as well, because more and more investors will start to look at that. So I know you guys are going to talk about business plans in another session later on, but when you're starting to think about putting together your business plan, there are a few key questions that you want to be able to answer. And again, this is a book that we have that's for free online that you guys can download and check out. But you need to be able to answer who are the founders of your organization and why this group of people, why this leadership team, who are your partners, why, what is it that you want to do? So clearly identifying the problem, as we talked about before. What is the problem and what is your solution? How are you solving the solution? How are you disrupting the market? How are you providing a totally new solution that has never been there before, or innovating on a solution that's already there? And really think about disruption and disrupting the market when you're thinking about your solution. You also need to know who else is doing it, and how are you doing it better than them? And that goes back to benchmarking. So looking around at who else is running programs like yours or running businesses like yours, and why is yours better? You should be able to articulate that. Going back again to the capital piece, what's your revenue stream, and what is that going to look like going forward? And thinking about that, what types of revenue do you want? What types of revenue do you not want? And how are you going to structure your enterprise to attract that type of revenue or to not attract that type of revenue? So yeah, if you can answer those questions, you're on your way to a good business plan. And again, you can check out this book. So we're going to go into a few other things to consider. Back to Susan.
Sure. So certainly if you're going to start a venture and you want to get funds and you want to get sales and you want to get audiences, you've got to look at where communications and marketing fit in. And a fair amount of what I would say is implementation and kind of, you know, executing is going to be 90% of whether you succeed or not. That you can have the most amazing idea, but if you don't build the team and know your market and you have no ability to execute, you're probably going to fail. And so the pieces we'd say that are kind of the add-ons to the four critical things we said are the communications and marketing. So we put a few things up. One, we talked about branding and marketing, and we put up a few groups that we've worked with. Some of those logos probably are really well known to people if you've been around the Boston community. That each of them probably had different iterations of times in their life where they went to kind of the graphic design and the branding people and said, this is who we are, this is what we do, can you help us redefine who we should be and how we should put that out to the world? You Aspire changed their name last year from Access, and I know that they went through a long process of really talking about what does it mean to give the access to high school students who want to go to college. And so if you notice, there's the little gown in there throwing the cap, but it's you. So meaning that they wanted to change their name in a way that made sense for them and made sense for their funding audience. And so here's just a few things to think about. It is rare in the first stage of your organization that you're going to get to a brand and a marketing piece that's going to last, but you probably want to start somewhere and know that you can evolve it as you go forward. One of the things that we do, I think I mentioned before that we actually work with graphic designers, and they are part of our Accelerator program. And so our graphic designers actually design a PowerPoint deck that's in the colors and the feel and the touch of each organization we work with. And so I only put up one, but if you look at this, you probably have an idea of what the age of the population is. Smart from the start. They're working with early age kids and the parents. And so they designed a deck that when they did a PowerPoint looked a lot more like the look and the feel of the organization that helped them, when they were pitching, get to that next level of professional look and professional identity that a small group often can't do on their own. It takes both a lot of work and a lot of creativity to be able to get from, I've got a white PowerPoint slide that's got some, red and yellow lines, to how can I get to something that really feels like us, but then it totally carries the organization to the next stage of their work, and any funder presentations and materials that they start presenting look very, very professional. Certainly social media. In this day and age, you can have a tiny venture, you can put your name out there, and you can be seen by lots and lots of people because of the power of social media. So if you start a venture, start tweeting, put something up on YouTube, look at Facebook, put it on LinkedIn. There's many different ways that just by yourself with your message, when you're ready to put it out there, you can begin to find an audience. One of our groups that we worked with, I think about 4 years ago, had never touched social media, had never considered, oh, why would I do social media? I'm trying to work with teenage girls who've been trafficked as my main piece of my work, and oh yeah, well maybe I should talk to my funding audience as well. And I think when they started realizing that tweeting and getting other people to care about the bills that they were trying to pass, about the times that they were having funding events and they wanted people to come, and that the power that they could take to just begin to get other people interested in their mission really helped them see that they had partners who they didn't know, could really be on their team. Okay.
So we've reached the end of our presentation. We're really happy to take your questions. We'll be here for a while to take questions, so feel free. And also, if you have questions at a later point, we would love to answer them for you as well, so feel free to email us. We're happy to chat with you or answer your email questions as well.
Hello, my name is Ram. You said root cause does consulting, right? So what is your model? Like, how do we have to pitch to you, and do you charge for it? Like, how do you work with either an aspiring business or a business that is already up and running and trying to figure out to
maybe I can
make an
answer
impact?
that. Sure. So the question is root cause does consulting? How can you get access to the consulting? And how do we work? So nonprofits can go to Root Cause and get scoped and get a price for full-scale consulting engagement, or a piece of a consulting engagement, or some kind of work. The Social Innovation Forum, which is a part of Root Cause, each year has an open venture philanthropy model that is both for nonprofit and for-profit groups that anyone can apply. It's free to apply, and you can become a part of a business, of a competition where a number of groups get chosen for free consulting and coaching and introduction to donors. This year for our nonprofit work, we had over 100 organizations apply for 5 spaces. It's a 6-month process from application, from when our RFP is launched to when we accept our groups, and then we work with our groups long term. So it's a long shot to get in, but if you get in, you get many years of help.
And we generally take folks kind of when they're at that next stage. So right now, as a startup, early stage startup, you're a little early for us. But after kind of a year of revenue or a cycle of running, you would be a great candidate for us.
Right, and it's a little bit easier to get into the for-profit Accelerator is an earlier stage group with a year of revenue. In the nonprofit Accelerator, some of our groups are 10, 20 years old. There's others who are 2 and 3 years old, but in the nonprofit Accelerator, you have to have a year of metrics, you have to have a board, and you have to have 1.5 paid staff. The flexibility in the for-profit venture is much larger.
Oh, I was just going to ask if you don't have your 501c3 status yet, if you can still apply.
So yes, and so most groups that don't have their 501c3 status either have a parent organization or have a fiscal sponsor, and that's fine. And so we will take early stage, and we have some organizations that are over 10 years old that still don't want a nonprofit status, and that's fine for us. We also take programs of larger organizations, so depending if you want to innovate within a bigger organization and not go through the whole setup and structure, but innovate an interesting program and tie yourself in with a larger organization, that's fine as well.
Hi, thanks so much for the talk tonight. I wanted to go back to those 4 critical factors which you had. 2 of them seem to be a lot of recruiting people who are very dedicated and who you can depend on, so the leadership team and also the right partners. But I was wondering, in terms of resources which we might be able to use in order to find people like that, are there any matching programs or websites which we might be able to do that? I'm just thinking beyond just the regular networking sessions and things like that.
Sure. So that's a great question. So the question is about where in the network, how do you build your network? And one of the things that I would say, and this is the second organization that I've spent many years leading, and I'm a network builder. And so what I'd say is, for people who naturally know how to build networks, you have much more success building an organization than people who feel like, I need to spend all my time getting the document perfect. It's very hard to build an organization, because when you're building an organization, you need all these different kind of partners and funders. So you regularly need to be looking at, oh my God, you're sitting there, you're smiling, I want to get to know you. So after a presentation, finding out what are your interests. Do you want to participate? Maybe you can be a volunteer, for one of my evaluation teams or something like that. I'm regularly, riding the bus and people handing me business cards, and I take things seriously. So I'll send people emails. I'll say, sign on to our newsletter list. Call us if you think there's a connection. If I'm looking for lots of funders, I'm not going to spend a lot of time with somebody who needs my time in other ways. But I don't, off the top of my head, have great lists for you of how to build networks. There's some amazing newer research about networks and the building of networks. What I'd say is network theory is probably just in its beginning phases, that probably, and you probably know better, maybe 5 or 10 years, people are really thinking about what does it mean to build a network. And I think when you're thinking of building organizations, understanding what it means to build in a thoughtful way is very important. The things I can tell you, like if you wanted to build a board and you're a nonprofit, the United Way has a board bank. There's some amazing resources online. I think they're through BoardSource and BridgeSpan have tremendous resources. You can just go to websites these days and find out almost all the printed information that you want to know. But what I'd say is, if you're going to build a board, you don't want to do it with just yourself. You want to go to somebody who's an expert in board building and sound out the whole process of what should your board look like, instead of just saying, here's my board. On the other hand, you might want to talk about a starting board, which is often friends and family.
Yeah, and also, when you're going for a for-profit venture, you don't necessarily need a board, but you do need advisors and mentors. And I think this is a great place to be, that they're connecting. There's tons of mentors, and there are people that are looking to be a part of startups here too. So here and Mass Challenge, I would look within your college, and I don't know which college you come from within Harvard, but looking within that and looking at the other schools too, to see if there's a resource. You're at the ed school, and maybe you go to the design school and start figuring out if there's someone over there that maybe could join your team, or at least advise your team. And never underestimate the power of just reaching out to a really cool entrepreneur who you think is doing an amazing work in whatever field it is. Often they're willing to even take your call. You're a student, you just call them or email them, and often they'll respond to you, which is, like, I think most of you guys are students right now. Amazing resource is utilizing your student status. anyone will talk to you. You don't like want something from them yet, and so they're willing to take your call.
Right, it's great to ask somebody to go have coffee with you because you're not asking them for money over coffee. You're basically tapping into them saying, I know you're a smart thinker. I'd love to just pick your brain and tell you what I'm thinking about. And even when you have a big venture, asking people to just meet you for coffee and get to know them, often you can pull somebody in who might be really interested in your work, but isn't going to just write you a check. And if you send them a proposal, they're not going to write you a check. But if you say, I'm at a building stage of an organization, I'd like to get to know you better, many people who are intrigued with what you're doing will sit down, and it might lead to something bigger.
And feel free to reach out afterwards too. You know, if there's a specific issue area, we might know someone that you might be able to, that we may be able to connect you with too. There were some questions over here at one point.
Thank you for everything you've been sharing. It's very helpful, and I'll try to be as brief as possible. But so I have a number of different programs that I've basically kind of put together to create a wraparound services for an educational district that's over receivership. So we're doing some STEM, which is now called STEAM because we added an art component, but we also added a mentoring component. So it's multi-layered. In terms of the overall impact, we don't have money to be able to hire someone to do some of the data and metrics, but we're seeing huge turns around. Even if it's 3 to 4 weeks, we see that the students are engaged, and I call it the AAA, academics, attendance, and attitude. They're changing dramatically. So, you know, we've got 14 programs right now throughout the whole district, but we want to be able to expand, and we can't do that unless we have someone who can help us track what's happening. Any suggestion, any advice, because we don't have the money for that.
Yeah. So you want me to launch in, or you want to start
with
that?
Yeah,
you go. Yeah,
okay. So check out our book too, because there might be some low-cost ways that you can start to track your own metrics and simple things that you can do. And the other thing I was going to add, and then Susan, you can jump in. The Annie E. Casey Foundation does a lot of tracking, of paying for evaluation and tracking metrics. So it's worth kind of looking. I don't know if you've looked into Annie and Casey yet, but checking them out. And they do a lot of kids count data. And there's sometimes money there for evaluation purposes. That's the only foundation I know that does a lot of that.
Yeah. I don't know foundations that specifically are focused, but sometimes you can find a foundation that will fund things. But the other thing that I'd say is sometimes it's really tough to get into the metrics work because it seems so big and seems so impossible. And it might be that when you look at this book, or you hand the book to somebody at the school, and they can pick out a handful of metrics that are actually pretty easy to track. In terms of pre and post testing, in terms of just a handful of things. If you begin to show that here's this population, they walk in with X, a month later they're at Y, you're much more likely to be able to get the next level of funding and say, here's some metrics work. You can also call us because, I can tell you about a specific program that functions out of root cause, that is out of root cause, that there might be a conversation for you with them. It's not a free program, but it's a much more affordable program than a particular metrics piece. I don't know if that would actually satisfy what you were looking for. It sounds like what you really need is you need core metrics. You need to track them for a period of time to be able to say out to funders, here's what we're doing, give us the next level of funding. Yeah.
Hi, thank you. You raised the notion of a benefit corporation. Could you speak a bit about your experience with benefit corporations here in Massachusetts, and perhaps how you are advising clients on whether the new opportunities and capital streams they open up are worth the extra restraints and additional work that goes into being a benefit corporation?
That's yours.
Okay, so I don't know the history of us working with benefit corporations.
Yeah.
We have in the past, but Massachusetts is one of the few states that has benefit corporations. We don't have the L3C yet, although there are folks pushing for that now. With the benefit corporations, I think you really have to think about whether it's right for you. There are certain restrictions, which are that you have to have a dedicated person who does a report along with your financial report when you submit your financials for audit. in that there's also this emphasis, I guess that's kind of the biggest constraint. And then kind of maybe the other drawback is that you don't necessarily get a tax break. So even though you have a social purpose to your business and it's a stated social purpose and you're doing this report, you don't get a tax write-off. You still have to do your business tax. So that would be some of the drawbacks. One of the big advantages to the B Corp is that you don't have to, your investors and the state, everyone knows that you're not just pushing for a financial return. So if you have a bad quarter or you have a bad half year or year, with a for-profit, you're responsible to your investors. And so when you have a bad quarter, you're not doing the work you need to do for your investors. You're not being responsible to your investors. With the B Corp, you're kind of off the hook a little bit because you can, you have this other social purpose that you're working towards. So I think when you're thinking about your business and you're creating your business, you have to think about whether you want those constraints as part of it or not. If you want to just kind of go the for-profit route and kind of figure it out from there, and you have investors who are very responsible investors and are willing to take this on without that kind of added constraint. One of the kind of most well-known B Corp companies in Massachusetts is Dancing Deer. Do you all know about Dancing Deer? No? Oh, yes, okay. And you know it, okay. They're a great company. They're a for-profit company. They have a lot of private equity invested in them. So they operate just like a regular company would, but they have these additional constraints. But they're doing quite well. They're a very successful company at this point. So you have to weigh kind of your options and think about it. I think we haven't seen a huge number of companies jump on because a lot of people feel like, oh, I can do my for-profit company and meet my social mission or social objectives there. I don't need these extra constraints, and I'm not getting the benefit I would really want. That might change with an L3C. Like there might be some differences there that would then make it attractive. Individual question for you, though. Yeah.
Just very curious, given your breadth of experience in the social impact world and then social enterprise especially, from the people that I've talked with, many have the sentiments that even though there's a lot of talk about social innovation, social enterprise, on the for-profit side, actually many have failed. And there just has been a lot of barriers for some reason. There just hasn't been a lot of success. And I'm just curious, from your experience, what are these barriers? What are these difficulties that they just can't seem to have overcome? Just very curious.
You want to start? You want me to?
I can try to take a stab at that.
And then I can try to add on. Yeah.
I think when you're thinking about social purpose businesses, you have to understand that they fall under this larger umbrella of businesses. And so many businesses fail for so many reasons. So even though you're starting this social purpose business and you have the best of intentions, you have great partners and a great leadership team, there are these stumbling blocks that just can't be overcome. And I think that's the case with every great business. I have a friend who's a serial entrepreneur, and half of his businesses have failed. And he has one right now that's incredibly successful. He's in the Inc. 500. I mean, he's doing really well. But so many entrepreneurs just fail along the way so often. So that's kind of the larger answer. I think with the social purpose businesses, a lot of times the entrepreneur can think, oh, the social purpose will carry me. I'm doing this great social business. This is going to be awesome. It's going to carry me even if I don't make a profit, even if I can't be responsible to my investors. And that's not true. So at the end of the day, you have a business, and if you're going kind of the for-profit business route, you have a business, and it needs to be a successful business. And as well-intentioned as you are with your social mission, sometimes you have to make sacrifices to that to make it a viable business. And for example, City Fresh Foods, I don't know if anyone know about City Fresh Foods? Also an awesome business.
Yeah.
Oh.
Here.
Oh, great. Awesome business. They are backed by Boston Community Venture Fund, which is a great venture fund that should be on all of your radars as well. but they had to make, they're a social purpose business. They're very successful, but they had to make some sacrifices in order to make it a viable business. They had to make some trade-offs and make some really tough decisions in order to be responsible to their investors and to continue growing. And they had to relook at their social mission and say, what can give here, and what can we amend in order to be a successful business? Yep. Do you want to add to that?
So the only addition, I think you laid it out really well, is that we hear that as well, is the stockholders actually do drive the part of it. And so though these organizations start with social purpose and have social purpose as their, as their vision, it's very different than in the nonprofit sector, where the social purpose is really the purpose of the work and the end user. And I think that we've regularly heard that the shareholders want them to maximize profit. And in the end, it's okay that it's a social purpose business, but a lot of the shareholders are in there for the profit. And so that there are times that the leadership is really torn, because the leadership might want to do more around the social purpose and feel like they have to go for profit maximization.
What should we emphasize in our application for the President's Challenge? Like, which issues are the most important to cover? Or do we need?
Maybe Maureen can answer that one.
Okay, thanks.
Are you talking about as far as the business plan, what topics to cover within there?
As far as how developed does our idea have to be at this early stage?
At this point, it doesn't have to be developed whatsoever. At this point, we're even accepting ideas. That's kind of part of the process, is even finding your team, kind of developing ideas. Once the finalists are chosen, those top 10 finalists will be given money to develop their idea even further. But at this stage of the game, when applications are due in February, even if it's just an idea, one that can obviously be built upon and to actually become something big, that's pretty much what we're looking for. So as far as the extent of your idea, it can just be an idea.
Folks, I hope it's okay. I was actually more curious about how we could apply for your program and what the deadlines are like.
Sure. So we issue an RFP every year. Usually it comes out in late June and is due at the very end of July. And then we will spend the end of July through December going through several levels of due diligence and evaluation. So feel free to sign up on our website or send us an email, and we'll put you on our list so you get our RFP. But look for us in late June.
Hello. You guys have had some really great examples of different nonprofits and for-profits. So I wanted to see if you had an example of a for-profit entity that did not take investor money and bootstrapped so that they could keep control of the social part of their venture.
Yeah. Do you have one of those? I'm trying to think if we've worked with any of them. I can give you an interesting example of a group that we worked with this year that came to us because they wanted investor money. And we match them up. A lot of what we do is we say, oh, maybe you should have coffee with this person, or this person seems interested. And there's a guy who closed his venture capital firm, around age 50 and wanted to do something else, had enough money. And he decided that he was going to match these kind of ventures with people who had money. And so he matched our group with somebody who came into his store, came to visit him twice. On the second visit said, I'm interested in giving you $300,000. I want 20% partnership. Here's what I want. Tell me in 10 days if you want this deal or not. And said, call me then. And so our person actually came in and kind of sounded it off with us and kind of thought out loud and thought, do I really want money from somebody who I don't know? And this person had a track record where he grew things, but what we realized very quickly was the social purpose mission part of it probably wasn't going to be the priority. It was going to be about money. And that in the end, a lot of the investors, what they want is they want to scale so you can sell, and they want to make a profit. And our particular venture leader wants to probably do this for life, wants this to be the career. And so it was a very interesting process of sorting out values and saying, maybe someday I will share some piece of equity, but I'm only going to share the equity in a place where the values match and I can continue to lead this in a way that develops the social purpose part of the work. So I don't know if that answers it. It's an earlier stage. I wish I could give you a bigger picture idea, but it was pretty real.
Sorry, I just have a question. Have you worked with any companies that are for-profit that have micro-granting programs?
So I'm just going to repeat it so you're on camera. So the question is, have we worked with any companies that do micro-granting, for-profit companies that do micro-granting?
Yeah, I don't think so. So as I say, we're only in our second year of working in the for-profit arena. So our first 9 years were just in the nonprofit arena. So I don't know that we have any concrete examples, of micro-lending. I don't think so. And it's interesting, we developed, Blue Homes got our Business Innovator Award last year, and we regularly are looking at organizations that are either foundations or are potentially doing kind of micro-lending or just social businesses that are businesses and have social purpose as a sideline in their foundation. And so we're regularly sorting out, where are the different levels of impact happening and where are they right for us and the way we're doing our work. And so it's even for us who are in it day to day. As Rebecca said, the terms are confusing and a lot of people out there are trying to figure out where they fit. Micro-lending probably doesn't really fit. We have, in our very early stage, Root Capital applied, and I love, some of you probably know Willie and Root Capital. I'm sure people know Root Capital. So they're doing micro-lending, and they applied, and I was like, oh my God, what an amazing leader. But when we really looked at what our work was about, which was actually working with innovators who were bringing impact back to the city of Boston, we decided that micro-lending overseas really didn't fit the core mission. And though we would love to have supported them and really helped them along with their work, all of the work and all of their impact was overseas.
So Blue, their impact is more so national. It's not just in Boston.
Correct.
If you have, I guess, an idea that is more so on that scale, does that preclude you from applying to you and asking you for no?
That'd be thrilling. So I'd say both in our in both of our accelerators, we're happy to support organizations and leaders who have big picture vision. What I'd say is more of the impact investing is really looking at impact all around. The nonprofit accelerator has focused on Boston primarily, though many of our groups have gone national.
You talked before about fiscal sponsorship, and I was just curious if you guys had a program to match budding nonprofits with potential fiscal sponsors, or if you knew of any resources.
So Third Sector New England is probably the best and the easiest resource around. I do know if you're at Harvard, the Phillips Brooks House actually does fiscal sponsorship for many, many of the organizations where people are based here. I don't know if that's just undergrad or grad school as well. Those are the only two that I know of. I think often you can go to a particular program that you know if you've got a relationship and somebody will take you on as a fiscal sponsor.
Can you name those two again, please?
So sure. Third Sector New England is the first one, and the second one, who did I say? Phillips Brooks House here at Harvard.
And recognize also if you have a fiscal sponsor that they're going to take a cut. And it's generally anywhere from 7 to 30%. So you need to negotiate and figure out kind of what works for your business too.
Yeah. Justice Resources Incorporated does a lot of, works with a lot of organizations that don't want to be their own nonprofit, but they're in a particular arena where they're working with justice-related types of programs. And I think it's pretty broad when you hear what justice is. And so depending what your organization is, it might be worth a conversation with them.
Great. Maybe this will be our last open question, and then you can come talk to us too.
So it better be good.
It better be great.
This is awesome.
Pressure. Touching on the barriers, I want to look at the other side. What are some common trends and common denominators amongst some of the successful companies that are going on right now? You've brought up some wonderful companies, and I just wanted to kind of hammer it home with a few of the key denominators amongst them.
Sure. So I'll give a few answers, and then I'll give a few points. So first of all, I would say leadership. So when we meet groups, it's all about, is there vision, and is the leader going to stay with it? And so if you're a leader who feels, if we sense you're likely to leave, or you say, I'm only in this for the short run, not likely to go. And I'd say that it's both individual leadership and who have they built in their partnerships? You know, who's on their board, who's on their staff, who are they working with in the community? And if you get those pieces in place, you can have, you know, 2 steps back, 3 steps forward. If you don't have that piece, it's really hard to make it work.
Really hard team, yeah. And I think you, I would say also going back to kind of the first thing we said is that you really have to have a solution that disrupts the market. That all of the solutions here, all of the organizations and the companies that we've worked with have brought some sort of disruption to the market and created a solution that it was a sticking solution that stuck, and they were able to accelerate it forward. I would also say on the kind of for-profit side of things, which is, as you're learning my angle, you have to have a model that's attractive to investors and really be thinking about that. The alternative on the kind of nonprofit side is, again, you have to have those metrics. People are in philanthropy, they want to know that their money is making change, and you need to be able to demonstrate that. So I think those are some of the other trends that have kind of woven throughout our really successful entrepreneurs. I have one other, I just lost it, but it'll come to me later. I'll let you know. So thank you for listening to us and coming out tonight.